Right, so you know the guy who follows behind the circus parade, clearing up after the elephants, right? That's me today. Talking about the Lib Dems. Lord Mandelson said that he felt more like a psychologist than a cephalogist. There are times during this campaign, about 3 days before the poll, I literally bumped into my then MP. I live in what was a Lib Dem Conservative marginal. Now it's a Conservative, fairly safe seat. But I bumped into my PPC, my Lib Dem MP, who asked me how I thought he was doing. So Peter Mandelson thinks he's a psychologist. All my colleagues think we're cephalogists. I felt like a psychiatrist at that point. And a therapy session on the couch was definitely needed. Okay, so I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly today. But just to say, I've spent a large part of the last 2 years going up and down the country saying, you know, Lib Dems might not necessarily be heading for the meltdown that you all think that they are heading for. I spent a large part of the last 6 weeks telling people in the party, actually, you might be heading for the meltdown that you now think you're not heading for. And there was an incredible sense of, over the past last year, I've probably spoken to around 30 of the old Lib Dem MPs while they were MPs, and they all kind of told me the same sort of thing. Party's in desperate straits. It's heading for disaster. I'll be okay because I've got a local campaign and I'm personally popular. Everybody else is heading for a disaster. When they're all telling you that they'll be okay, but everybody else is heading for disaster, it shows you the kind of groupthink that the party got itself into and the part of the problem that it was. And I think those problems started at the very formation of the coalition. Now, I wrote something in 2010 criticising the Lib Dems for the coalition formation. Basically, if they'd looked more like a European minor party and gone for control of one or two ministries rather than to be embedded throughout the cabinet, they might have been in a better place. Their argument against that is that by being spread throughout every branch of government, they could see what the Tories were up to and they could stop things from even reaching the agenda. But I think that also is presentational, and I think that the Rose Garden stuff and the cuts and the glee with which the Lib Dems were seen to be in an austerity government to start off with just made them toxic. So David Laws and Danny Alexander, particularly David Laws, became the poster boys for austerity in the first few months of the coalition. And then when the recovery came, it was George Osborne claiming the credit for the recovery. Local and by-election meltdown, the 2011 AV referendum, where we saw Nick Clegg being used by his erstwhile colleagues as a reason not to vote. Vote intention, I mean, you can't see it because it's yellow, but from that very point here, where is the pointer? That, isn't it? Right, that very, very sharp decline. That sharp decline pretty much predates the student fees vote, right? Okay, so you kind of knew it was coming, right? But the damage was already done, right? And then from there, there's just kind of no recovery. All right, okay, so 1,300 councillors lost. Massive problem. Collapse and devolve. Clegg was consistently the least popular of unpopular leaders, and one of the ways in which I want to just point to the kind of denial that Lib Dems got into is that they defaulted to a kind of traditional strategy of how Lib Dems campaigned. And this involved lots of leader debate, lots of leader visits. So if they were identified as a key seat, you'd get leader visits. And in the way that Paddy Ashdown used to go around the country in his helicopter and rally the troops, and and they might put up their vote in Colchester by 4 or 5% as a result. Well, in 2015, getting a leader visit from Nick Clegg might not have been the best idea for the party to have, right? But it was something that they were stuck to. The presentation of the coalition. This is Danny Alexander presenting an alternative budget with a bright yellow box, routinely lampooned on Twitter, a bit unfairly, but I do think there was there's a bit of an issue here that once you're in a coalition, it's really hard to campaign as being outside it as well as being inside it. And I think that this was a strategy which actually they struggled to pull off. They kind of got shot from both sides. And interestingly enough, for all sorts of reasons, 2015 reminds me of 1992. And the Lib Dems made a critical error in 1992. It's in the academic literature, it's called Ashdown's mistake. And it is the problem of being equidistant, getting shot from both sides, refusing to rule out dealing with either party. And in 2015, after being in power with the Conservatives, it's really hard, I think, for the Lib Dems to say that they would go into power with either or neither. And if you look at who's in charge of the 2015 campaign, Paddy Ashdown and Ollie Grendel are familiar figures. They knew, I mean, I'll say a bit more about this in a minute, but they knew that during the campaign, the SNP scare was hurting them in areas where they were competing with the Conservatives, right? And so they needed to come up with a tactic for that. The one they came up with was this blue kip scare. So they ran their own scare, which was, well, if you have David Cameron, you might be reliant on UKIP to form a majority. Well, you wouldn't want that either. Now, the strategic problem for them here, right, was that if you felt that you didn't want a Labour government, a minority Labour government, having the strings pulled by the SNP, that might be an effective way to persuade you to vote Conservative. If you listen to the Lib Dem argument about blue kip and you didn't want David Cameron's being controlled by the puppet master that was Nigel Farage, well, it strikes me that that too might be a good reason to vote Conservative. And so actually it just never hit home, it just never cut through in the parlance of the in the parlance of the campaign. So what happened? I mean, pre-election we're doing lots of stuff saying, well, look at the incumbency effect, look at where they're defending against the Conservatives, look at where they're defending against Labour. In effect, it didn't make that much difference. They did badly pretty much everywhere. Regionally, they did badly everywhere. Seat type, they did badly everywhere. There is a bit of an incumbent bias for Lib Dems who stay on, but really not enough to save anybody's real bacon. And all you need to know is that line, and the direction of that line. Okay, I'm just gonna finish up a little bit. Angela Merkel, we used the quote here. The little party always gets smashed. There is one. Okay, there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. The first is the Lib Dems in coalition in Scotland for 8 years didn't do badly from that coalition, and so it might not have happened in that way. And I would also point to one coalition where the minor party did remarkably well. They had the Deputy Prime Minister, they had control of the domestic ministries. Any serious academic account of the 1945 general election says that it was Labour's role as the minority party in the wartime coalition that gave them credibility. And so I don't subscribe to the view that it was absolutely inevitable. All right. Using BES data, what's clear is that the Lib Dems were neither blamed nor credited for issues, for blame for high migration tended to go to the Conservatives. High cost of living tended to go to Conservative. Education got worse, the NHS got worse. But if you credited the economy, you also you credited the Conservatives. What did Lib Dem stand for? And this was a real issue. They don't have ownership of any issues. Now we know that this is a continual theme for third parties. They tried to own certain issues, hypothecation of hypothecated taxes to go to schools or the NHS in the late 1990s, and then of course tuition fees and anti-Iraq war in the 2000s. That's kind of been lost to them. Failure of the campaign, I've talked about UKIP. They were just outgunned by the Conservatives in particular. Conservatives won 27 Lib Dem seats, right? And that is the problem. That is the inherent problem, and it's got repercussions for the party going, for the whole of party politics, I think. One of the stories that's emerging from 2015 is that for the next election there are even fewer marginal seats than we've become accustomed to having. And part of the reason for that is the collapse of the Lib Dems. The collapse of the Lib Dems in the southeast and the southwest of England makes it much harder for the Conservatives to be unseated next time round. And Labour strategists better wise up about the fact that the Lib Dem collapse there is bad news for them too. All right. The blind faith, the party's polling, where they tested policies. The groupthink was unbelievable. They were literally telling journalists on the battle bus 2 days before the election that they were going to win 6 Scottish seats. Worse than just telling journalists that, they actually believed it, right? At a time when most of us thought they'd be lucky to get 6 Scottish votes, right? They thought they were going to get 6 Scottish seats, and there is a sort of KPI problem here that they looked for every positive endorsement, and that was exaggerated, right? So they looked at the polls and said, well, we do much better because of incumbency. They looked at the Ashcroft polls, which asked people to say, well, how would you vote in this seat? Right? And that gave them a slightly increased reported vote intention. And then they looked at their own polling, which named the individuals, and again it showed them doing even better. An endearing, but perhaps a naive, ability to believe what people would say when you're asking them on the clipboard when you've got a big yellow rosette on. Okay, where to next? The last 2 elections where the party have gone in as wholly equidistant, 1992, 2015, were bad, were terrible for them. It's a crossroads of the party. Rob's tried to show how they may recover from here, but it may just be a dead cat bounce. All right, let me stop. Thank you.